I want to get to the heart of what's going wrong when it comes to policing crime in this country. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that parts of this country can feel lawless. From my own experience, walking through parts of our capital at night time, it can feel like the Wild West. Men loitering in balaclavas, hoodies at street corners, fights breaking out outside fast food shops. The fear of being mugged or worse is very real, I'd say. The stats do back this up. We've seen a record number of fatal stabbings in the past year. We're also seeing firearm offences on a meteoric rise. Sorry, I hope I'm not ruining your Sunday lunch with all this, but it's what's happening. A report by the Daily Mail found that gun crime in England and Wales has almost doubled in 1 year. In London, it's increased by 2,533%. That sounds pretty shocking with that kind of percentage increase. These figures is shocking indeed, and that's before we get on to robberies and sexual offences and other crimes. In the past week or so, we've seen huge amounts of vitriol towards the police, not least over the way the Nicola Bulley case has been handled or mishandled by Lancashire police. There's also the scandal-ridden Met that failed to protect women from the evil crimes perpetrated by serving police officers David Carrick and Wayne Couzens, to name a couple. I want to know what you think is going wrong when it comes to policing crime in this country, and crucially, what needs to be done to restore trust in what is an essential service. I'll be speaking to two very different guests on this today, but I want to hear from you too. Please do email me at gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at CarverEmily@GBNews. I am joined now by former police detective Chief Inspector Peter Kirkham. Peter, I'm not sure if you were listening just then, but I did paint a rather bleak picture of the situation of crime in this country, firstly, but also trust in the police. How do you think we can restore that trust? What do the police have to do?
It's really difficult for the police to manage the levels of trust the public have in them themselves, because the vast majority of people don't have direct dealings with the police or don't have many, and so they pick up what's going on, and their attitudes are formed by what's reported in the media. And the media, unfortunately, in this country, and probably inevitably because of the way the media operates, have asymmetric reporting about policing. They don't report proportionately the good work done by police and the positive things to do with the police service in the same way that they report the negative things. There is a massive, massive skewing of the coverage towards the negative, and that helps form public opinion. In your introduction, you talked about firearms offences going up by a massive percentage, but firearms offences in this country are a relatively small number of offences. So a relatively small number of additional offences gives you a large percentage increase. So you need to be, wary of that. You also named two police officers, former police officers, whose offending was at just, appallingly high. But there are not dozens and dozens of other ones you could have named. You'd struggle to name anybody else in the same category, even historically. And so we need to be careful about how policing is reported and try and even up this asymmetric levels, if we can.
Peter, I think some of what you say is perfectly reasonable. Of course, the media does report on things that go wrong, and that gets a lot more public interest as well. But also, people see what they see with their own eyes. And travelling around parts of this country, you do feel like it is a bit of a Wild West. There don't seem to be police officers available. There are young men causing trouble constantly. There is a fear, being a young woman or a young man walking around, that you could be harmed physically and no one would notice, no one would intervene because of the fear that someone could be carrying a knife. And then, of course, you have people who have smaller crimes but still significant crimes, robberies, thefts, etc., that it's hard to get a police officer even interested in.
It's not so much of being even interested. The issue is one of capacity, and that affects not only whether you see police officers around, which I agree you don't anywhere near as much as you should in a properly policed society, but it also means the officers that are there are constantly rushing from job to job, and then they really haven't got the time to do anything properly. And certainly not the softer stuff like keeping victims and witnesses informed and things like that are absolutely crucial to the investigation or prosecution. Now, you should be directing questions about the numbers of police officers to Theresa May and others who, it is no exaggeration to say, destroyed UK policing just short of its 200th anniversary. She destroyed it. She's ripped the heart out of it.
Peter, I agree with you, and people at home will certainly agree that reducing the number of police officers out on our streets has contributed to that feeling of being unsafe and contributing to the number of crimes on our streets. I think that very much likely is the case to be true. But is there anything that the police officers themselves are doing wrong? Because we hear quite a lot about how police officers are engaging in, whatever it is, social justice campaigns, or, the wokery and things like this, taking the knee and going soft on protesters if they're for a trendy political cause and whatnot. When it comes to actually the dealing with crime investigations, do you think that police officers could be doing things better? Are we recruiting the best people?
The recruitment, because of the starting pay and the pay and conditions and the attitudes of the public that they're going to meet, recruiting is difficult. And so the bar is being lowered and lowered and lowered in terms of the recruits. That's not to say the majority of them aren't going to make really good police officers.
No, Peter, are you suggesting we've got subpar police officers? We're hiring rubbish police officers.
We're hiring people that wouldn't have made it through the higher levels or the higher bar of recruitment as it was 10 years plus ago, because of the pay and conditions and because of the attitudes of the public. It's a bit of a sort of catch-22 situation, really. But there's certainly things that police officers could do. They could think a little bit more about how they're using social media, and especially in private groups on Facebook or on WhatsApp or such like. They don't need to be doing those things. That's nothing to do with the numbers or anything else. It's just levels of behaviour. But those levels of behaviour, the police officers are doing things that I would suggest are fairly commonplace out there in society. And so they need time during training. They need supervision and management in their first few years of service to stamp out any of those things. And the supervisors, the trainers and the managers are not there. And that is absolutely to do with capacity.
I do wonder if it's very difficult for police officers now out on the beat, out on the streets, when every person has a mobile phone that they can then video the police officer, intimidate in that way. It must be extremely difficult, and I do have a lot of respect for police officers. I just think something fundamental is going wrong. Thank you very much indeed. That was Peter Kirkham, former Met Police Detective, Chief Inspector, giving the police view there. Now, joining me now is Zoe Dronfield, who is a domestic abuse survivor and campaigner. Zoe, I'm not sure if you were listening to that, but where do you think the police is going wrong in terms of trust?
Well, I think there's lots of things, really. I think first and foremost, there's no visibility of police these days. And yes, of course, it doesn't help when you've got the likes of Wayne Couzens and David Carrick. But also, the fact is that these so-called police officers who went on and did these awful crimes, there was reputations there before them around, Rapey Dave, and these kind of names don't come from nowhere. And so, you know, what's going on within the police culture internally that this is allowed to happen? Have they not got a robust whistleblowing policy where other police officers can actually call this behaviour out? Because clearly there was behaviour and there was convictions. And you know, the ex-police officer that spoke before, you know, for him to blame everything on the fact that the public are losing confidence, I don't think that's very fair. We're losing confidence because of what's going on with the, you know, the vile stuff internally that needs to be dealt with. And of course, what can we talk about in the media that is positive? Because actually I've just been looking this morning at statistics on crimes being solved, and it's the lowest proportion ever. So there's something seriously going on. There's no proactive policing anymore. I've campaigned for the last 8 years for a serial perpetrator register of domestic abusers, which would mean that they would proactively track and monitor those most dangerous offenders. And it just seems that they just react to a lot of things. And I know that they're going to say that resource is an issue, but all of the public services are struggling and having to do more with less. And it's about changing the way that you work. And I just don't think having less police officers visible on our streets is helpful.
Well, no, and I think you make a very good point there when you say that people have experience of the police for themselves. They're not just manipulated by media reporting of one or two cases that have gone wrong. This is something that people see with their own eyes. I mean, even the relatively small stuff, like your car being nicked from outside your home, and then all you getting is a number that you then have to give to the insurance.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly, small things like that.
The thing, isn't it?
Now, you're a domestic violence campaigner. That's what you campaign on. I'd like to ask you about the Nicola Bulley case. What are your thoughts on how it's been handled and what we've seen in the media and from the Lancashire police? Do you think this highlights something going wrong in the police as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, straight away when I listened to the police, you know, the report, and they came out and spoke, they're just always coming from a defensive position. And this is why I talk about the proactive policing. You know, the fact that they've then released information, private information about vulnerabilities at this late stage, it's, you know, it's questionable, isn't it? Why wasn't this released, if it is important, right back at the beginning? And of course, if you leave things late, there are going to be questions that are asked.
Yeah, there will be questions that are asked, and then they take, as you say, a very defensive stance. Now, just very quickly before you go, the Greater Manchester Police, that is the police force that you dealt with. Can you tell us a little bit about what that was like?
It was West Midlands Police, actually.
Oh, West Midlands, sorry.
Yes, West Midlands Police. But yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, the attitude of the police that I dealt with throughout going through domestic abuse was just horrific, to be honest. And even after what happened to me, you know, I'd almost been murdered, and I'd sent 3 text messages asking not to be contacted by my perpetrator from prison. It was witness intimidation, which he was convicted for. And I'd got a call from a police officer saying, on a Friday evening, saying, you're going to get in trouble for sending these 3 text messages. I could be up for a harassment charge for asking, you know, my perpetrator's family to leave me alone. And the call kind of went like this. It was like, you know, he called me on a Friday evening, said, you know, you could be looking at a harassment charge. We want you to come into for a voluntary interview. I said, if I don't come in, you know, what will happen? They said, well, you'll be arrested. I said, well, it's not voluntary then, is it? And then he said, I said, look, you do realise I'm a victim of domestic abuse. And he said, oh, you're not going to pull that one, are you? And these are the kind of attitudes and comments that cannot be made. You know, it's just horrific.
I mean, that is quite extraordinary that they use that kind of language to talk to you. I mean, you would have thought that police officers would go through stringent training in how to talk to victims of violence and domestic violence when you must have been in a quite emotional and traumatic stage of your life, of course, and that's not the way you talk to a victim of violence. Sorry, we're going to have to end the interview there, but thank you so much for coming and talking to us on Alistair and Friends.